Adaptive radiation in the Galapagos. The Galapagos Islands are an archipelago of volcanic islands in the Pacific Ocean about 900 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador in South America. It currently holds around 9,000 different species total, with a total landmass of 8,000 kilometers squared. Since Charles Darwin's famous time studying at the islands, they and their surrounding waters have been declared a national park and marine reserve, and have a human population of around 25,000. The first time a human set foot on the islands was back in the 1500s, and the islands became famous 300 years later in 1835 after Charles Darwin's famous expedition. Adaptive radiation is when one species has enough space in an island with high resources, low death rates, and high birth rates to rapidly fill many niches. The main characteristics to identify that adaptive radiation has occurred are recent common ancestry, phenotype environmental association, which is when physical bodies have clearly adapted to the environment they live in, and the use of these physical traits in their environment, as well as multiple variations of species appearing around at the same time. In the Galapagos Island, there are also many other species than the famous finches. Among those 9,000, there are the giant Galapagos tortoises, marine iguanas, Galapagos fur seal, Sally Lightfoot crab, among others. Being able to have adaptive radiation for a species requires an opening to be valuable, specifically in the amount of species currently living on an island. When there are less species on an island, there are also less valuable niches currently being filled. An area with high species variation doesn't just suddenly lose their species populations either, unless there's some sort of climate epoch or terrible natural disaster in the area. Adaptive radiation generally occurs in one of three key areas: a new habitat appearing, like a volcano creating new ground in the ocean; a relatively isolated habitat, such as an island far off of the coast of a mainland; or an extinction event occurring, leaving niches that had previously been occupied now empty. In September of 1835, Charles Darwin had spent 5 weeks at the Galapagos Islands observing the wildlife. After returning home to London, he studied the notes he had collected about the varying species and noticed that there was something very important to evolution about the different species of birds he observed. He looked at the different species of birds and realized that there were all slightly different variations of finches. He studied the topic even further and later came to the conclusion that a few million years ago, one species of finch migrated to the islands from mainland and ended up becoming 14, now 15 slightly different species, with traits evolved to survive better in different niches. This was through a process called adaptive radiation and allowed Darwin to be the first person to come up with the idea of natural selection. Darwin's idea of natural selection was something new to the known world. Previously, the idea of transmutation of species had been rejected by many prominent naturalists, such as Georges Cuvier. At the time of his report, there were two main ideas surrounding why species were the way that they were. The first idea was that species were created by God exactly as they are now and have not changed, and the second idea was that species change over time to match the environment they are in. In this time period, scientists could have believed either side if they had been provided enough evidence. After Darwin reported his findings from the Galapagos, he faced backlash from prominent religious figures in England, but by his death in 1882, the result of his work became recognized as fact. Charles Darwin became known as the father of evolution, and the famous finches of the Galapagos Islands became known as Darwin's finches.